Welcome back to the Zeitcast, where we explore intersections of spirituality and culture. My guest today, if you've listened to me for any amount of time, needs no introduction at all because the Reverend CeCe Jones Davis is a legend for all kinds of reasons. One of my favorite people, one of my favorite preachers, a great activist, a great organizer, a lovely human in every way. And yes, anybody who knows me or knows anything about me, I'm pretty sure knows all about you, CeCe. So it makes me awfully happy to see your face today. Thank you for being willing to do this.
Jonathan, friend, I'm glad to be with you. I'm glad you're doing well, and we haven't talked in a long time, so I'm glad that we're able to do this today.
It's been a minute, and of course, it was so awesome having you at DePaul last year for the Mendenhall and getting that whole experience. Well, and back in Oklahoma a few weeks ago, that was a great treat. But I certainly don't get to see you nearly as much as I'd like to. How about we start with this question and we'll go from there. I'll ask the question I asked briefly before we jumped right on. Why don't we start with how you're doing and we'll go from there. How are you, my dear friend CeCe? How is your soul right now?
Yeah, thank you for asking about my soul. My soul is better than it was a couple weeks ago. The results of the election really rocked my soul for a little bit. Before we pressed start on this, I was beginning to say that I theoretically understood that the results could be what they are now, but emotionally I had not prepared for the results to go that way. And so it really did hit me hard, and it hit, so many people hard. I know so many folks who work extremely hard, particularly Black women, to get out the vote and register people and educate communities and mobilize and organize. And I think I felt the volcano among Black and brown women for sure when we understood the results. So it's taken me a few days. It's taken me a little bit of time to kind of shake it off and realize that this is real life, and we're gonna press on and make it like we always have.
This is not my question, as you might imagine, but I'm wondering if it's a question you still deal with, because I feel like you do get this some out in the ether somewhere. Like for people who are sort of like, because a lot of people around me, a lot of people that I love are grieving and experiencing this moment this way. Do you still have folks in your life who kind of do the sort of like, oh, well, so your person lost, like what's the big, do you still have to explain that to anybody, or is your life such now to where you don't have to have a lot of conversations with people who say that?
Yeah, I think people those folks have weeded themselves out of my life to a great degree. So I have not had to have that conversation, and grateful, really grateful for that, because it takes a lot of energy.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting now, CeCe, because I don't know if this is your experience. One of the things that maybe it's good in a way, but also feels frightening about the moment we're in, we're so siloed now. I mean, you get the handful of like trolls and that kind of stuff, but I find it like in general, for those of us who've been really clear about what we think about a lot of things, the weeding out's really different, because stuff that like a couple years ago, it feels like if you said it, you'd be like, you'd just be expecting to go to war. Now it's often like it's either amens or crickets, because it does feel like a lot of the folks who are not concerned about the kind of things that we're concerned about in the world don't engage the same way. Is that your experience?
Well, I think that people have to eventually pick a side.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that there have been so many people who have tried to stay in touch and stay engaged and stay together, and because we want to live into this term unity so much, right?
Sure.
But I think over time, as things have become so deep and so polarizing in modern time, that people have had to pick a side.
Yeah.
And that reality, I think, has caused the weeding, right? And so I at this point, I don't expect just any and everybody to be able or willing to hear from me, right? And that's okay, because I've picked a side. don't expect for everybody to be able to hear from you because you've picked a side.
Sure.
And so I think that has a lot to do with it, that our audiences have gotten very specific and precise based upon the sides that we choose.
Yeah. And of course, what I hate about that is of course you want to move the conversation forward. And certainly for someone like me in the kind of spaces I'm in, I do feel like, okay, I need to do everything I can to try to, kind of come for my own people, as a Southern, white guy and like all things. And yet I feel like realistically, it's just where it is. Yeah. Like when you, in terms of picking a side, something, CeCe, interesting enough, for all the conversations I've been having, I've not actually attempted to do this in a podcast. And I say this knowing, and not saying we're the same, but we're both, okay, so we're not sociologists, we're not data folks, we're both preachers, we're ministers. Yeah. We traffic in vibes and like all the things. I'm wondering what your sense is at this point, and kind of, as now everybody's doing the endless postmortem from the election, all of that, the dynamics from, okay, people know exactly what he's selling, what they're selling in terms of the racism, the misogyny, all that is more overt than it's ever been. Or, a lot of conversations around like, not unlike Biden's win in 2020 on the heels of, the COVID pandemic. People are going to take inflation out on the current administration just because they're going to like blame somebody. What's like your sense in terms of like, why are we here? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that we're here because of fear, right? Like, if we talk a lot in spirituality circles about roots, and I think the root of all of this really is fear. I think that people are afraid of the browning of America. We have statistics that suggest that by 2040, the majority of Americans will be brown. Yeah. Right. I think that freaks folks out. Yeah. I think that the reality of pluralism scares folks to death. I think, so many people have, their American identity has been so tied up in the idea that America is a Christian nation. Right. That trying to come to terms with not just the browning of the United States, but also the other religious scene of the United States, I think is a huge deal for folk. I think when it comes down to it, white people are afraid of brown people. Lots, not all. Okay. Sure. But I do think there's a lot, when we think about this, the numbers of white women and white men who voted for this person, I think that a part of it does have to do with the majority having anxiety around browning and around pluralism. I think that people are afraid of what it means if everybody is not going to be a Christian, or at least in name, in this country. Yeah. I think that really freaks people out. And so, I think that people would rather hire a lunatic who asks people to pray for him, or, speaks, has adopted a particular language. I think people would rather go another round with that person than dealing with the realities that they might not be first for much longer. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all that rings so true for me. I mean, it's interesting when you do try to have the conversations, because like, I always say I've never met a racist, everybody's, oh, I'm not a like no, almost no one's a card carrying racist. Like you don't have it in your wallet. So then it's interesting then, I feel like what people will say that they're voting for, what they say they care about is, the economy, or like blah, blah, blah. And yet the messaging in this campaign in particular, there was almost no language about the economy or anything constructive at all. It really did feel like it was just front door hot, like racism was the lead in the Trump campaign, and much more overt to me than 16 or 20.
I mean, I feel like 16, when, he said that President Obama wasn't a U.S. citizen, and questioned the origin of his name and all of those sorts of things. Like, all of that, all the shithole countries he's talking about,
Yeah.
African country, all of that during this first term, right? Like, we can lift up example of just ignorance and racism, right? For me, for this election, was racism present? Absolutely. I mean, let's talk about Black jobs,
Mm.
right? Let's talk about Black jobs and what that means. So yes,
Mm-hmm.
racism, it was incredibly present. But I also think that that one of the main issues for this campaign, when we talk, going back to fear, was LGBTQIA
Absolutely. Yeah.
brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Those folks scare the shit out
Yeah.
of Donald Trump's base. I'm not sure they even scare Donald Trump so much, but he panders to the fear
Yeah.
that, so many people in his base have around that. And I know some of that is spiritual conviction, but I think for
Yeah.
most of it boils down to phobia and fear.
I'm glad you said that, CeCe, because this cycle in particular, as much as I care about Oklahoma and as much as I care about Indiana, North Carolina is home, and I watch it like a hawk with elections. I was so curious as to where it was going to go, and I'm watching everything. And I'm telling you, North Carolina, they ran the trans prison ad into the ground. I mean, every couple minutes, all day, every day. I mean, that was the whole game in North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that was like front and center for a lot of voters, right? And maybe not even people who identify as Christian, but a lot of people have a hard time around, we're making a little bit more progress with the L, the B, the G, the B.
Mm-hmm.
But when you
Mm-hmm.
talk about the T,
Yeah.
when we're talking about bathrooms, when we're talking about hormone therapy, when we're talking about sports inclusion, when we're talking about surgeries, like when we're talking about these kinds of things, people get completely freaked out.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I don't think is reasonable and understandable. You can understand, why folks have anxieties around some of these things, right? But I think the T is extremely
Mm.
hard for folk to fool with right now. They
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
by and large, cannot wrap their minds around who are they, how old should one be to
Mm-hmm.
be able to choose, quote
Right.
unquote, this particular identity. What does that mean for health care? Do I want my tax dollars? I mean, it goes on and on, right?
Yeah.
So I really, really think that was a really big issue for this campaign, and a reason why Donald Trump won.
It's so right, and it's fascinating because while it's an issue that technically you're talking about a fairly small group of people and a fairly small amount of money in the grand scheme of things, when people talk about uh, gender affirming care in prisons and all the things there, I'm curious what your sense of, because we've had versions of this conversations many times, but this in this particular moment, because coming from spaces, especially in terms of the largely conservative tendencies in many quarters of the Black church,
Yeah.
not just evangelicals, et cetera. What are those? How do those conversations sound like for you right now, especially in this moment when? And I'd love to get your take on this. I feel like we're hearing a lot. I've read plenty already, in the Atlantic and elsewhere, kind of saying, yeah, the Democratic Party has gotten, has kind of tripled down on the left. It's got to become more mainstream, more moderate on these exact issues. Like what? How do you respond to any of that right now?
I don't know that I have a great response to that. I'm not a super politically savvy person. I have worked for a White
Sure.
House administration. I did, my best to contribute to this campaign. For Kamala Harris, of course, I care about issues. I care about international policy. I care about domestic policies. But I wouldn't say that I'm, some guru in this space at all.
Sure.
And so I feel like the Democratic Party should have been a lot more specific
Mm.
in addressing the concerns that conservatives have just
Mm.
across the board.
Yeah.
I think that maybe they could have done a better job talking to conservatives, right? And understanding that when you live in a diverse society, you have to learn to speak in tongues. You have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be able to communicate in diverse ways in order to reach the hearts and minds of diverse people,
Yeah.
right? So I think that in hindsight, the party itself could have done a lot better. I know that people like me who, we have our finger on politics only because we care about people and people
Right.
impact and politics impact people. I think that people like me really felt the urgency of the moment,
Mhm.
because there has felt like, and it is so much at stake.
Yeah.
We talk about Palestine, Israel, and we talk
Yes.
about a second Trump administration and what that could mean. It's
Yeah.
that's scary. That's scary to me.
Yeah.
When we talk about Russia and Ukraine, and we think about the former president's relationship with Putin, that's scary to me.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
and so there's so many when we talk about the fact that the former president has said, for police officers, we're gonna push for full immunity.
Yeah.
Well, hell, what does that mean for Black folks who are getting gunned down in the streets, right?
Yeah.
And so these are the types of issues and policies that people like me have cared so much about, and so
Yes.
we're forced to wade through these waters, right?
And CeCe, especially as we're kind of doing this, and it's almost my sense of it. If we're doing a bit of a not just political, but almost a spiritual postmortem of the election and all that,
Yeah,
as someone who cares very deeply about what's happening in Gaza, and it's been people like you, it's been a lot of us who are people of faith who've really, in that regard, been the most critical of the Biden administration.
yes,
What is your sense in terms of like how much that played into what ultimately happened here a
yeah,
couple of weeks ago? Like, do you think, I mean, because when we see communities, like, especially I'm thinking about some of these communities in Michigan in particular, where it
yeah,
seemed like the vote was kind of punishing.
yeah.
Do you think a lot of that was a kind of backlash?
Yeah, so let me go back and just say, let me just confess to everybody who's listening here. I was not going to vote for
Mm,
Biden or Kamala Harris. I was not,
yeah.
because I had watched a year's worth of bloodshed that it was and is on the dime and in the White House of these two individuals.
Right.
Okay. And so I was one of those people who, my feet were planted by the rivers. You understand? Like I was
Yeah.
not fixing to be moved on that. What moved me, two things moved me. My elders moved me.
Mm,
I had, elders who understood where I was and understood my angst about, what was going on in the world, who called me and said, "We understand
mm,
how you feel and why you feel that way. But you cannot allow everything that we've worked for to be thrown away."
mm.
That hit me like a ton of bricks because I understand what they mean when you're talking about 80-year-old people who survived the civil rights movement and
Yeah.
survived segregation before that, and all Jim Crow and all kind of craziness. I
Mm,
mean, that stopped me in my tracks. That was one. And then the second thing was the GOP conference,
yeah.
the RNC.
Yeah.
Man, when I watched that RNC, by the end of it, I was like, okay, we cannot allow this person back into office,
Yeah.
right? So it really was those two things um, that brought me to life when it came to Kamala Harris's to supporting Kamala Harris. And once I
Mm,
was in,
yeah.
right? Because I understood the consequence a lot more, that it wasn't just going to be about punishing
Yeah.
an administration. This was
Yeah.
ultimately going to be about punishing vulnerable people, right?
Mm,
Who may or may not survive under crushing policies.
mm.
And so,
Yeah. No, go
yeah,
ahead, please.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I actually really appreciated CeCe because I so get it, kind of seeing and feeling you working a lot of that out in real time, which is always complicated, when we do that with whatever platforms that we have. But I
Yeah,
appreciate it because having those competing impulses, because there's this very real way that on the global stage, if you're a Palestinian person, to an extent, it may not matter who won this election on some level, in that, it's a continuum of like bad. Domestically, it's a very different conversation. So in that way, it actually almost made me feel more sane to watch you struggle with it. Like, what does it mean to try to bear faithful witness for our
Yes.
Palestinian friends? And yet also, when I think about all that you've done for Julius Jones and really everything justice in U.S., as you said, like if this means ultimately a stop to like all of that progress, but what a complex thing to have to work out as a spiritual leader.
It was complex, and thank you for saying it, because I've probably never been so unstable in all of my days, and I said in several posts on Instagram, y'all, I'm gonna be strange for quite some time because I'm really, really struggling.
Yeah.
And I think we do have to be honest about those struggles, right?
Yeah.
That there's a lot to hold all at one time, especially when you are a person from a marginalized or historically oppressed community, especially when you have a history in this country where people have fought and died and struggled.
Yeah.
For you to have particular rights and responsibilities. And I mean, there's a wide array of issues that we have to hold together all at once, right? And so I try not to be I'm trying not to be shy about that, because that is my human experience in the world. And
Yeah.
God bless everybody who's 100% clear 100% of the time. God bless you and have a smile upon you. That's not my story, right? And so I don't even remember the original question. Can you
Oh, no, you're doing it. I just it was more like just appreciating the way that you worked that out in real time, because I just think it's like, well, when, the question even of like, who is my neighbor? Well, we have more than one neighbor and they live in different parts of the world and they're affected by these things differently. And so like, I really appreciate the way that I could see that it wasn't black and white for you and that it was angsty for you, because it's angsty for me, because there is that part of me that kind of says like, yeah, in a way, like it's all empire. And as a Christian, there's a part of me that would like to kind of say, no, I don't participate in system of empire. And yet I also know the implications are really, really dire for a whole lot of people that I love.
That's right.
On the ground in this country. And both of those things can be true at the same time.
Yes, and they are. And so that's why we have to be compassionate, strategic thinkers.
Yeah.
And understanding also that, while we are striving toward perfection and a perfect world and a perfect society, we don't even know how to define that, by the way. But while we're striving for whatever's in our imaginations behind that those things, as far as I'm concerned, are not reachable.
Right.
Not in this earth realm. I believe that justice is about adjacency to what is closer to the kingdom of God. I don't believe that in a fallen world, we're just going to see everything perfected and boom, one day we're going to fight. And it's just going to all be wiped out and all be well. No. I believe that we can get proximate and close and better. Right. And so it's for me, when I think of things that way, that helps me.
Yeah.
Because then I don't have to beat myself up about, well, that's not perfect. Well, then we can't do this. And no, we have to walk and chew gum at the same time to the best of our human ability.
Yeah. Trying
to move things in the right direction, knowing that, it's going to be mighty bumpy along the way.
Yeah.
And in our lifetime, we might not even get to. Think about how, the folks in the book of Hebrews is described. Those people fought for and dreamed for and prayed for and had things they never saw. Right? And so to some degree, approximation has to settle in and be okay. That reality has to be okay while we strive.
Yeah, that's so good, CeCe. Well, and I think as best as I understand everything I've ever read from, whether it be Dr. King, the Reverend James Lawson, all these folks kind of in that movement, there is a sense, that proximity means you go where the issues are. And if sometimes the issues are moving in different directions, and that means, you might say things or have to say things that might sound contradictory to people, because it's like, yeah, well, the proximity here means one thing, proximity there means something else. And
Yeah.
so like I really appreciate the fact that you've been willing to kind of just walk out that ambiguity in public, though I have to imagine that's uncomfortable when folks are kind of like, wait a second, I thought you were on our team, so.
Yeah, and my sense, nobody has really ever yet, at least, like, called me out on my strangeness, because I think that people get it,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
because I think that when we're honest with ourselves, we know, okay, I've got this thought, it competes with that. I've got this belief, it competes with that belief. I think that we, even if we don't completely have language, we understand that we're a mess, that we're all just trying to work out these kinks, not just internally, but out in the world. We're trying to work out these kinks. And I think that people understand that because they got their own kinks.
Yeah.
And
yeah, indeed they do. Especially if they're in a cabinet position right now.
I
Some other kinks, sorry.
Probably not the word. Probably not. But you understand, like, we got these knots and we got these knots in our societies.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to work them out. So I think people understand that. So nobody has called me out. The bottom line is that I'm trying to be faithful.
Woo. Absolutely. Yeah.
I just want to be faithful.
Yeah. And I think people recognize, CeCe, that most people, like, who are paying attention are going to be able to see that there's an attempt to be faithful to something beyond people and parties. Like, there's an attempt to be faithful to God. And so, and I love that so much. I do know you carry these things deeply. Speaking of carrying things deeply and the cabinet, I'm wondering right now, is because it does feel like the news the last few days, it's pretty relentless in terms of, as the different picks roll by. How do you balance in terms of, like, your own sanity, mental health, the state, like your own soul, like, to what extent you engage that or pay attention to that, or to what extent you have to kind of unplug from that right now? Like, what does that look like for you in terms of, like, even being able to sustain your soul in such a way so that you are able to keep going in what you feel called to do?
That's a great question. I will say that and for the election for 2016, I had no balance. I was eating the news up. I was outraged every day. I was outraged every day. For the last year of this genocide in Gaza, I have had no balance. I have watched and shared and commented and raged until my little soul doesn't even know how to rage anymore. Behind the images we've seen, we have seen a genocide right before our very eyes. And I have felt a responsibility to watch, because that's the very least I feel like I can do. That's the very least I feel like I can do. It has taken a tremendous toll. It has taken a tremendous toll, all of these things, because all of my work is kind of heavy, right? I'm drawn to these intense things. It's like, like little, sad carrots I just follow, I'm drawn to these things, draw me in deep. And I realized one day that number one, my mental health was at rock bottom. I was having a hard time getting out of the bed in the mornings. I was having a hard time sleeping. I was having a hard time functioning outside of all the things that were going on in the world, right? And being a mother, I have to be able to function. I realized that, and I also realized that the things that I was showing on social media, while I did, and I do feel like we need to watch. And I wasn't going to be one putting up a whole lot of what do you call them, sensitivity screens. No, I didn't care nothing about my own sensitivities, and I didn't care nothing about anybody else's sensitivities. Because if we're gonna pay for bombs that are killing little children and grandmas and granddaddies, then the very least we can do is have the balls to watch the people that we're killing. Right? So I didn't give a doggone about nobody's mental health, including my own. I'm trained in pastoral care and did not give a doggone. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So I had been running so hard, but I came to a point when I realized that there came a point, and I think it was around October. It was around September that I said, okay, I've got to slow down for the sake of the people who listen to me, consume my content that I share, and I've got to slow down for my own sake before I just kind of jump off a bridge, you know. So how do I balance? I have determined that this man is not going to kill me. That this administration not going to kill me. That if my folks have survived all these hundreds of years and still been able to sing songs, find joy, and cook good food and get together, then that's what the heck I'm gonna do. And so I'm not as enthralled like in the news. Like, you know, I have a sense of what's happening, but the way I used to be, just consuming all the time. No, because I really do feel that joy is going to have to be a weapon for so many of us. And so anything that's getting ready to come and just steal my joy, I'm gonna put up a fight against that thing. And these cabinet picks are trying to take some joy. And so I just try to turn it down a little bit.
Yeah. I love the both end of that, CeCe, because it's like the sort of, not the kind of retreat of just like, oh, it's all self-care. And you do have that prophetic instinct and you follow that. But then there's also the sense of like, also I'm a mom and also I have to function and also I have to retain enough joy to have energy for the fight. And, so I love just like, but even that, CeCe, that's one of the things I so appreciate about you. And I think it's true about, I see it so much in the Hebrew prophets, that kind of like, once again, more than one thing can be true at the same time. And it's okay to acknowledge that.
Right.
What's sustaining your soul right now?
That's good. I think what's sustaining my soul, one of the things that's giving me a lot of joy right now, and sustaining my soul is planning for Thanksgiving. My family, the women in my family, we have a tradition of, fighting over the menu, every year. Who's going to cook that? Who's going to cook? And it's like a serious mission, And so we squabble about who's making the macaroni. Okay, wait a minute. That person does not make the best macaroni. So we'll fight because we got to have the right macaroni. That is not the person. We literally have fights about this.
It's amazing.
Right? Just kind of organizing around togetherness is given me so much joy, knowing how many family members are going to be with me in my mama's house in the middle of nowhere in the country. How so many of us are going to be sleeping on pallets on the floor. We don't know how we're going to sleep, if we're going to have enough blankets, but doggone it, we'll all be there together. That's bringing me a lot of joy. I'm also learning, because I'm naturally a really intense person. I feel deeply. I think deeply. I'm a naturally intense person. I'm learning how to laugh more at things that used to just tear my nerves up, right? I'm learning how to laugh more. And so, as I watch my mom at this stage in her life and her siblings and, their squabbles, I mean, they are hilarious.
That's awesome.
Looking at me like, this is serious business. Why am I laughing? When I think about those things in the context of all that's going on in the world, those things really are endearing, because we only squabble and argue, take the time to do that because we care. And because we love each other. This is just a strange, toxic way of showing it, right? But things are much funnier to me. Things are much funnier to me now, and that's good for me.
Yeah.
And I have to have some humor in my life because otherwise I'm way too intense.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
really feel that because I sort of both as a person who also tends to internalize things really deeply, but I in the sense like, yeah, but the world is absurd, and the people we love are absurd in actually hilarious ways, and we can't find a way to laugh at that and laugh at ourselves and like find
Yes.
some lightness in the midst of it.
Yes.
Mm.
100%. It's really medicine, it's really, really medicine. And so I'm trying to learn how to lean into the light moments because I
Mm.
lean so much into the heavy moments and the
Yeah.
heavy things. And I don't want this life to pass me by and I'm just angry.
Yeah.
I'm just pissed off all the time. And
Yeah.
I'm just in deep, intense thought all the time. And I'm I'm bitter and callous and
Mm.
I need those things in my life to maintain soft edges.
Yeah.
Because Brene Brown talks about having a firm back and a soft heart. That
Hmm.
that's what I want to have. I
Mm.
want to be brave. I want to be strong. I want to, do all those things. And I always want to be a soft person. I always want to live open-heartedly,
Yeah.
right? And this world will totally challenge you not to be open-hearted.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I need a mixture of things. Like I need
Mm.
that humor. I need art. I need to do something with my hands. I need to cut somebody's grass sometimes. I need to
Mm.
go work out. I need to laugh with my kids. I need to
Yeah.
watch a documentary. I need all of these things in order to be the kind of human being that I really think is best,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I love that, CC. And I'm thinking, even when you were talking about how kind of just the resources in your own tradition and history of kind of like the things that people have lived through. I was Sunday, the lectionary text was Mark 13, where Jesus prophesies about the destruction of the temple. And it was it never hit me that way reading it this way now. Like, oh, yeah, well, the temple did fall. People did live through that.
Yeah.
And the church found a way through all that. But at the time, of course, it had to feel like the end of the world. But when you think about like not only the folks who have resisted before, but then I think about like what you've done in Oklahoma. It's kind of like, well, I don't know. Is it that much more uphill than where you've already been in terms of like, I mean, in a way, like this is what you do. This is what you've been doing for a long time is saying the unpopular prophetic things in the midst of Governor Stitt and like all of that. Like this is very much something that's been in you to do and that you've done for a long time. I still hate though that there has to be an element of grieving and a sense that and it has to feel painful when you are throwing yourself and putting your words out there and your work out in the way they are to like of course you want to move the needle and see things actually change.
Yeah. No, and you do. You totally do. And grief and anger and all of that is a motivator.
Yeah.
Those things show up because we need to know that something is wrong, something is
Yeah.
off, something needs to change, right? And so yeah, you want to put that stuff to good use and push things forward. And sometimes it doesn't feel like the needle moves,
Mm.
right? But I think I'll be honest with you, I think I've been discipled pretty well.
Yeah.
And I haven't been discipled like in the social justice work. I've just been
Mm.
discipled as a follower of Christ. But in all those things, some of those things I've been able to consciously see translate well. Like
Mm.
getting a hold of the scripture that talks about one man sows a seed, another person waters, but God gives increase.
Yeah.
So really kind of understanding that you have a specific job
Mm.
that God has called you to. And that specific job is all that you will be held accountable for. And held accountable for me is we need to like underline that. Held accountable.
Yeah.
Held
Yeah.
accountable. Because I know that these days, lots of people's notions of heaven and hell are very, very different, right?
Mm.
But for me, that thing about accountability is very important.
Yeah.
I remember growing up, I was a little kid. I mean, a little bit of little things, 7, 8 years old. And we would be doing nothing, just in the kitchen with my grandma. She might have been humming at the sink or, rolling out some biscuits or something. And when she would just kind of snap her head all of a sudden and say, "CeCe, when you stand before God, there's not going to be anybody to your right or to your left. Do what God tells you to do." And then she would just turn around and go back to rolling out her biscuits. But those things, those kinds of encounters, those kinds of things, seeped really, really deeply into my consciousness and into my soul. And so this idea of accountability for what God has called me to do, and for that thing to be the only thing I'm responsible for, it's real to me.
Yeah.
It's real to me. My ambition, I want to see things finished. That's why the Julius Jones thing was tough for me. One of the reasons that we weren't able to bring him home, that he's still his life was spared, but he's still in prison. Like, that thing bothered me because I am a finisher.
Sure.
I'm a finisher. I'm a high achiever. I'm a finisher.
Yeah.
But then those spiritual truths call me back to say, a man plants, somebody waters but God. And I have to bow to that.
Yeah.
Humble myself to that. And that's the way I survive. Because when you try to work outside of the gift and the calling and the grace.
That's right.
And the position that God has called you to, all hell breaks loose and shit goes to the wind.
Yeah. I know we're, encouraging each other, preaching to each other a little bit here right now, but I tell you, CeCe, it hit me so hard the other day in that same text, the one about the destruction of the temple, because when Jesus talks about, and that's, all the language of perilous times and earthquakes and rumors of war is connected to the destruction of the temple. But it hit me so hard that at the end of that is when Jesus says, when they bring you in front of the councils. And essentially where it lands is like, bear witnesses. You'll bear witness, which is what, of course, the people of God were called to do before. And it's also there where it says, like, don't think about what you'll say when you get there. The Spirit will give you that. But there was something so clarifying in a very, like, just spirit fire way about that sense of, like, in response to my own wrangling about what am I going to do? What am I going to do now? Well, you're going to do the same thing you're doing before. You're going to bear witness, because what else can any of us do except to bear witness to what we've seen and heard? Like, what other task is there, in a way?
Right. That's good.
But I love that. Some of it too, just understanding your own vocation, like your own lane. Well, here's what God's called me to do. So that's what, I'm going to keep doing that.
Yeah. You got to keep doing that. And if God calls you to do something else later on, then that's later on and that's something else. But being faithful to the race.
Yeah.
Being faithful to the fight, and not just every fight, but the fight that God has called you. I would love to, stretch out my arms and embrace the troubles of this entire world and bring them close and have the ability to heal them and fix them. But I'm not that, right? I'm a creature of limitation.
Yeah.
And so I just have to thank God that God has placed passions, strange passions, as far as I'm concerned, into the hearts of all kind of people who are out here doing saving turtles and whales and all kind of things. God has put these burdens in people, and people are out here doing their work.
Yeah.
And maybe I can send $5 to their foundation, and that's where I can support that. But that's not what I'm called to.
Right.
They're educating me, and I'm hoping to be a better person based upon their work. But I don't have the ability to hold all the issues in the world. God places in my heart what He's assigned for me to do, and I gotta stick to that. And what He has assigned for me to do boils down to loving God with all of my heart and loving my neighbor as myself. That's a big job.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, CeCe, even the words that you use, because I just keep feeling the both and in them, in terms of there is accountability and there is also limitations. Both of these things true at the same time. Accountability, there's weight, there's gravity, there's gravitas to that. Yeah. That's serious. But there's also I'm mortal. I'm flesh and blood. Of course, there's only so much one person can carry and so much you can do. And so I just love that permission again to allow like both of those things to be true at the same time, as opposed to picking accountability over your own limitations, or
Yeah.
or saying, "Oh, I'm fragile and finite. I can't be held accountable." It's like no, it's possible for all this to be true and to coexist.
It is absolutely the truth, right? Like I think we use a word a lot, non-binary.
Yeah,
Life is non-binary. It's not either or, right? It's a whole lot of things working together. And I get a picture a lot in my imagination. Um, I get this picture of me on my knees,
mm.
just kind of, just kind of letting things fall out of my hands on my knees. And I really feel like that's the Spirit's way, oftentimes, of reminding me that hey, you're one, but you're but one, but you are one. That in fact
Yeah, yeah,
you have a responsibility and you have power, but that power is limited. And sometimes you're gonna have to get low. You're gonna
right.
have to. I mean, I don't know how people survive this life and with their minds staying intact without a sense of humility. That
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
do a lot of great things, but I can't do everything. I wish I could.
Mm.
I can, I can do this. I can think of that. I can do that, but that I can't do. And so we're truly gonna need God working in other people, God calling other people. We're going
Yeah,
right? And so I do think um, that keeping your finger um, on the real threat of ego getting out of control when
yeah,
you are a
yeah.
person who struggles with the savior complex,
Sure.
and just remembering to be intentional about real, authentic humility, just
Yeah.
accepting that you are one, but only one.
Mm.
It's really important to me, and I'm trying to grow in it more
Mm.
and more. So I can be a healthier person.
It's so good, CeCe. Yeah, I think for me, I think about it so often in terms of for me, it's the major message of the book of Job. This idea that yeah, in the grand scheme of the wildness of things, we are small, and there is a gift in that smallness of like being able to, in a way, yeah, destinies don't rest on my shoulders. I have a part to play, and I will be held accountable, like all of that. But also, there are those limitations. I don't because all this is so beautiful and life giving. I hate to land with a heavier question, but I did want to make sure I at least ask you this, CeCe, because, and not at all, of course, in the sense of ask you to give an account for this, but more, I'll put it like this. I still feel like I'm very much an evangelist about these things. So, like, in my way, I'm talking to anybody I can talk to in all quarters of the world, and I know how like things play, and I'm getting some of the traction already, where it's sort of like in light of the election, where we saw, and especially for those of us who talk a lot about race and fear, as we've talked about today, and the way that fear is then used in this way, for the folks who then kind of say, like, the fact that Trump in this election made gains among non-white voters becomes then already like kind of a justification to say, well, see, it's really not about fear. It's not about racism. We know this because, uh, so what I'm just curious in terms, because I so value your spiritual diagnostic in that way of how you think about that.
Yeah, I think I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that. I think what we're seeing sociologically is not just race. I think we are also seeing gender.
Yeah.
I think that there are many in the minority communities, Hispanic, Latino communities, the Black community, who would rather have any man than
Mm.
a woman,
Yeah.
and a Black woman on top of that.
Yeah.
I do think that that's still a thing. Someone said once that the Black woman is the most disrespected
Mm.
species on earth. I I think we might just have a little proof here.
Mm.
During this election, you have a highly qualified Black woman
Yeah.
running against a mediocre at best white man. And for misogyny's sake alone, many people, regardless of race, will move toward that white maleness. That I think that's an indictment regarding our misogyny, patriarchy. I really do. I think that we also have to think about class. That when we think about how people who have 4-year college degrees, as opposed to people who don't have 4-year college degrees, voted, right? And how information, how they might, synthesize information or receive information differently.
Yeah.
I think that plays into it as well. And then I think, in spiritual, in terms of like the spiritual part of this, and this is religious, it's not spiritual. I think that white evangelicalism has done quite a deal on Black minds, on minority minds, in that a lot of people have adopted the one or two issues that white evangelicals historically over the last 30 years or so have decided to care about, not understanding that their communities, our communities, we might have to think about those things, but we have to think about other things as well.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think to a great degree, we are so many folk are influenced by white evangelicalism.
Yeah.
Right. And the fear that I really believe it perpetuates.
Yeah.
So I think all those things, but I'm going to tell you, let's get down to the spiritual part of this.
Yeah.
I think that since it did happen, it had to happen. And I say that because, when there was an assassination attempt against a former president, I saw, obviously, thank God his life was spared.
Yeah.
People really, there was a real, surgence of support around him at that time. And I felt like, okay, this man very well could win. This is when Biden, of course, is still in the race.
Sure.
This man could very well win. But what does his winning say? What is it showing up to teach us?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that many of us spiritually will have different interpretations.
Sure.
Of what it is teaching us. To some of us, it will be a mirror of our society, of our community, of how we think, of how we treat each other. To some of us, it'll be going back to the basics of our Christian principles, quote unquote. For some of us, it will be about stopping the LGBTQ agenda and all of that kind of stuff. I don't yet know this thing is. Some of us will think about it in terms of judgment, right? How is this moment coming forth as God's reflection unto us? God's judgment of us, our behavior, our ways. And so if it did happen, maybe it had to happen because every high thing must come down.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what will be of this empire and what is God's will for this empire in 4 years. For a prophetic word to be prophetic, it has to happen.
Yeah.
That's the only test for prophecy, is that it have to happen. So I say that to say it's going to take a lot of patience. It's going to take a lot of watching. It's going to take a lot of discernment. Yeah. It's going to take more than the hysteria. Yeah. Is what I'm saying. It's going to take more than the hysteria that is easily brought on by cabinet picks, by the dumb shit that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth. It's going to like spiritual people are going to have to be very spiritually minded
Yeah.
and be listening and discerning what God is doing and saying over the next 4 years. And it's going to take not just discernment, it's going to take patience. We'll have to do a whole lot of watching and be patient. So we'll see. But I think since it happened, it had to happen. And now the question is why? And so we watch to see
Ooh. Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, CeCe, you said so many things there that I want to hold on to. I mean, everything from, I love your critique because I think it's such an important one, that white evangelicalism is not just white individuals, but is a structure and a system, perhaps at this point, even a principality and power, but that a mindset that affects all kinds of people in all kinds of ways. But I love you coming back around to this kind of like moving beyond the hysteria into that patient, deep work of discernment, and what is God revealing to us about ourselves? What are we really seeing in the mirror? Maybe we're seeing a lot of different things in the mirror that might not be easy to metabolize at one time, because there's not a one word answer. There's not a one sentence answer, because I've been said that for a few years now, this idea that I think that Donald Trump is very much God's man, just not how y'all mean. Because there is a this way of like, it's almost like here you go. You want to know what you're about?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, here's it. It's because I do think of judgment as like a mirror in that way, and I so appreciate your encouragement to be patient in that, and yet to not be hysterical, and yet not look away, because if we look away, we're not going to be able to see the things that God does want to reveal in this moment.
Right. I think it's going to take a steadiness of soul.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that people who have endured might not have used that kind of language, but I think that's what those communities offer us are models of steadiness of soul. How do you wade through the waters of tough time and not drown and not give up and not succumb to despair, right? And so I think it will take a fortification of soul. I think it will take a settling of our souls, that I plan for this upcoming administration to do it much differently than I did the first time around.
That's interesting.
I plan to do it much, much differently, because number one, there's no reason for me to be surprised about anything.
Yeah.
Because if history is the best indicator of the future, if what has already happened will indicate what happens in a second term, then I don't need to be shocked, right? Like I don't need to be overwhelmed, because we've been down this rabbit hole before, right? That's first. But then secondly, I do need to stay by still waters so that I can discern and hear well and remain the kind of person, because I can become a troll in a second now.
Sure.
I can become a troll in a second, and so how can I stay by waters that keep me sane, calm, spiritually minded, not disconnected from this world, but with a third way perspective, right? With a non-binary perspective, that heaven is my home, that's where my citizenship is, all the stuff we say in church, but I have a deep and abiding connection to this earth realm while I'm in this earth suit, and I have things to offer. I'm going to have to be settled in order to carry all of that.
That phrase, you use steadiness of soul, and I want to honor your time, CeCe. But like, I'm just so sitting with the way that, and I've never had this thought before, the way you said it just then, trying to get over the sense of when you've seen the playbook, not being surprised all the time, because there is this sense, like what happens largely to even our bodies in shock is that we shut down.
Yeah.
And so that's just an interesting way of thinking about it. If it's possible, even if that does involve phases of grief, like whatever, but to move through the shock so that everything doesn't hit like a surprise. And therefore there's able to be, doesn't mean you're be pleased by everything, but still be rooted and grounded, and just not be just not be utterly, go into a state of shock. I wonder if sometimes it's like that. People literally keep going into a state of shock over and over again.
That's right. And we don't have to go into a state of shock. And there will be moments where we need to take action.
Yeah.
You know, there will be moments when folks had to take action during that first administration, and there will be moments when we will still need to take action. And but we are working out in those moments a practical theology.
Yeah.
Right? An embodiment of what it is we believe and who we believe Christ is, therefore meant to be in the earth. And so we can even take those actions moving in and by the Spirit. When we think about it as Christ's life lived out through us, it doesn't have to be a shock. It doesn't have to be it shouldn't be a shock. And we should still show up for things and for people when it matters. So let me say that, because I really want to make sure people don't hear me say I'm going to sit by a poolside somewhere and just chill out for 4 years. I'm going to do some pooling now. Don't get me wrong. But that's not all of what I mean. I also mean that it's the steadiness of soul. It's not about paralysis, right? Like waiting is not about paralysis.
That's right.
When I'm waiting on the Lord, I'm not somewhere paralyzed, still not doing nothing. I'm just doing something with patience. So I think we're going to have to take deep gulps of joy and life and show up with passion and compassion when it matters over the next 4 years.
So good, CeCe. My actual sense of this, both like not just for me, but I think for people who will listen and watch this, I feel like you're bringing still waters in this conversation. I almost just feel it. People just kind of like coming out of the storm and just receiving that, like, yeah, it is possible to enter into steadiness. It is possible to enter into stillness. Obviously, you don't feel pressure to do this if you're not feeling it today. But I can tell you, I sure miss the fact that for several years in my life that I got to pray with you once a week, every time. If you would feel so led, I would love it if you would pray for us, just in whatever direction you want to take it, whatever is just kind of in your spirit now.
Yeah.
But it does feel like, man, I do feel like the shepherd is visiting with some people right now and bringing like some comfort that's rooted and grounded and just deeply needed.
Yeah. What I want to do is start us off with the 23rd Psalm, because we made a reference to it. Now I'm going to be reading it from the NIV version. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely, your goodness and your love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." And so, God, we understand you today to be our most loving and gracious Good Shepherd. We thank you for how you lead us into places of calm. You lead us into places of peace. You lead us into places of mercy, God, just because you're good, just for your name's sake. And yes, God, there'll be some dark times. There have been some dark times. We can anticipate some dark times. You have not lied to us once about that. But we rest assured today that we do not have to fear evil because, God, you're with us. You are a strong God, a capable God, a loving God, a providing God, a protective God, a passionate God, a compassionate God. So much so, God, that you make sure that our needs are met, that we can help meet the needs of those around us, and that our enemies don't have the final say. Lord, we thank you for how you anoint us in this hour to do the work that our souls must have. We thank you for how you are anointing us in this hour to be peacemakers. We thank you for creating in us clean hearts and renewing in us right spirits before you. Lord, that the oil of joy would rest upon us even in the dark days. We thank you for being a river that is willing to live and breathe and flow through us. We thank you that your spirit allows us to be witnesses of your love in this earth. Would you help us? Would you help us to remain steadfast? Would you help us to be steady? When we're not steady, would you help us get back on track? Would you help us to do and be in the world with love and with truth and with grace and with mercy? Would you help us to pull those things from a well that will not run dry? God, you are our source for every good thing. You are our source for every fruit of your spirit. And so we rely on you. We trust in you. And according to Proverbs 31, we can laugh without fear of the future. We bless your high name and we call your name Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Ooh, thank you, CeCe. That
You're
was
welcome.
wonderful. So good to see your face, friend. I love you so much. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for the way you are in the world. Hope you know just how much I love you. Nicole loves you.
I
All of
love
our friends. We cherish you so much.
you, all my people. I'll see you soon.
Okay. So great to see you, friend. Thank you.
Bye.